Eli hit the ground running before his brain caught up with his body. 14 years old. Homeless. Nobody's son. He saw the red laser dot tracking across the gravel and he moved. One tackle. One bullet. One boy who had absolutely nothing, spending it all on a little girl he had never spoken a single word to. But the shot that grazed Eli's shoulder was never meant for her. It was meant to send a message to the most feared brotherhood in America. And whoever sent it was already standing inside the circle. Before we move forward with the story, if this already has you locked in, hit that like button right now and subscribe so this story doesn't disappear on you. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We read every single one. Now sit back, relax, and let's enjoy the story together. Eli hit the ground running before his brain caught up with his body. That is the part nobody talks about when they describe what happened in Sturgis that Tuesday afternoon. They talk about the shot. They talk about the girl. They talk about 610 bikers dropping to their knees in the August heat like the sky itself had pressed down on their shoulders. But nobody talks about the 3 seconds before all of that. The 3 seconds where a 14-year-old boy with dirt on his face and 43 cents in his pocket looked across 22 feet of open gravel and made a decision that most grown men would not have made. He did not think about it. That is the thing about boys like Eli Calloway. Boys who have survived group homes in Phoenix and bus stations in Flagstaff in 3 days without eating somewhere outside of Albuquerque. Boys who have learned to read danger the way other kids learn to read clocks. Fast. Automatic. Without the luxury of hesitation. He just moved. The Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in the Black Hills of South Dakota is not an event you can prepare yourself for the first time you experience it. It is a living, breathing, roaring organism that swallows you whole the moment you step into it. 50,000 engines running at different pitches. The smell of hot asphalt and engine oil and something that is almost electrical in the air, like the atmosphere itself is charged with the weight of all that chrome and leather and history. Vendors lined Junction Avenue from one end to the other. Live music bled from 3 different stages simultaneously, competing with each other and losing to the engines every single time. The Black Hills sat in the distance like they were watching, ancient and unbothered, the way mountains watch everything. Eli Calloway watched none of it. He was tucked behind a commercial dumpster on the eastern edge of the full-throttle saloon lot, knees pulled to his chest, a half-eaten hot dog balanced on his left knee and a paperback copy of Mice and Men sitting open on his right. The cover had been torn off weeks ago somewhere outside of Tucson. He had not missed it. He knew the story well enough by now that he barely needed the pages either. He was not reading. He was watching people. The way he always watched people. Scanning faces. Reading body language. Measuring exits. Skills that the Arizona foster care system had never taught him, but that 3 years of surviving on the edges of it had burned into him permanently. He was 14 years old, and he had the eyes of someone twice that age. He had been in Sturgis for 9 days. He had arrived with no plan and no destination, the way he went most places, carried by a combination of hitchhiked rides and Greyhound buses and the particular stubbornness of a boy who refused to stop moving because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant feeling, and feeling was the one thing Eli Calloway could not afford. He did not know yet why his feet had brought him to Sturgis specifically. He would understand that later. Razor Ruiz was not a man who attracted attention at the Sturgis rally. That sounds like a strange thing to say about the president of the Hells Angels Sonoma County chapter. A 6'2" wall of deliberate stillness with 20 years of road behind him and a reputation that had reached states he had never visited. But at Sturgis, men like Razor were not unusual. At Sturgis, men like Razor were simply part of the landscape. He moved through the merchandise corridor on the saloon's north side with Lily's hand in his, 2 fingers of his left hand wrapped around 2 of hers. She was 9 years old, and she matched his pace without being told, wearing tiny leather boots that she had picked out herself from a shop in Sonoma 3 weeks before the rally. She had been asking about Sturgis since February. She had a list. Lily Ruiz was the only person alive who could make Razor smile without trying. She was pointing at a display of hand-painted helmet designs and explaining to him in great detail why the one with the eagle was the best one and why the one with the flames was trying too hard, and Razor was listening with the full weight of his attention the way he always listened to her when the golden retriever appeared. It came from the direction of the food vendors, off-leash, collar tag swinging, moving at full speed across the gravel lot with the pure joyful stupidity that only golden retrievers manage to achieve. The tag read Biscuit. Biscuit was not concerned with the rally, or the crowd, or the $1,000 worth of chrome he was threading between. Biscuit had somewhere to be. Lily saw him the same moment Eli did, from opposite ends of the lot. She let go of 2 fingers and ran. Razor turned 1 second later because Grant Holloway, president of the Hells Angels Tucson chapter, appeared at his left shoulder at that exact moment, hand extended, and the social architecture of Brotherhood means you do not ignore an extended hand from a chapter president. Not even for 1 second. Especially not 1 second. Eli saw the laser dot before he understood what it was. A thin thread of red light moving across the gravel with a purpose that had nothing natural in it. Not a reflection. Not a trick of the August sun bouncing off chrome. This was directional. This was tracking. Moving from right to left across the open ground with the patient, mechanical certainty of something controlled by a human hand from a distance. It found Lily at the center of the open lot. It stopped moving. Eli's body was already in motion. He did not make a sound. He did not shout a warning. There was no time for warning, and some part of him below conscious thought understood that. He came from behind the dumpster at a full sprint, 22 feet of open gravel between him and the girl, his paperback hitting the ground behind him and his 43 cents scattering somewhere in the dust and none of it matching at all. He hit Lily at the waist with everything he had. They went down together behind a parked Harley-Davidson Road King on the lot's eastern edge, Eli's body covering hers, his chin connecting with the asphalt hard enough to split. The shot came. Not the way gunshots sound in movies. Smaller than that. Sharper. A crack like a branch breaking cleanly, swallowed almost immediately by the ambient roar of 50,000 engines so that half the people in that lot never heard it at all. The bullet caught Eli across the left shoulder, tearing through the gray hoodie he'd been wearing since Phoenix and spinning him sideways into the concrete. The pain arrived a full second after the impact, bright and total, and then the world tilted and went quiet in the specific way that worlds go quiet when a body has absorbed more than it was ready for. Lily was underneath him, unhurt, breathing, blinking at the sky with an expression that had not yet decided what it was. Eli could not move his left arm. He stared at the underside of the Harley and listened to the rally continue around him, completely indifferent, and thought about the book he had dropped. He thought about whether he would be able to find it again. He thought about whether any of this had worked the way it was supposed to. Then the black SUVs arrived. 3 of them, no visible plates, moving into the full-throttle lot with a speed and coordination that had nothing scrambled about it. Razor clocked them from across the lot the moment Lily's scream pulled his attention, and he was already moving when the doors opened and the badges came out. Not Highway Patrol. Not Meade County Sheriff. FBI. Razor had been in enough rooms with federal agents to read the difference between law enforcement responding to an emergency and law enforcement executing a plan. The first looks like controlled chaos. People talking into radios, establishing perimeters, eyes moving everywhere at once. The second looks like this. 3 agents walking directly, purposefully, without hesitation, to a specific point in the lot. Not sweeping for a shooter. Not establishing a cordon. Walking straight to the bleeding boy on the ground with the focus of men who already knew exactly where they were going. The lead agent crouched down over Eli. He looked at the boy's face for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Razor had seen enough men try to hide recognition to know exactly what it looked like. Then the paramedic rolled up Eli's sleeve to treat the shoulder wound. And stopped. For full seconds where nobody moved and nobody spoke, and the only sound was the rally continuing its roar beyond the lot's edge. 50,000 engines completely unaware that something had just shifted in the world. Crow stepped backward. Des grabbed his arm. Razor leaned forward and looked at what was on the boy's forearm and felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the South Dakota wind. Because that symbol had been buried. It had been buried in a closed casket in Bakersfield, California. 7 years ago. There is a particular kind of silence that has nothing to do with sound. Razor had experienced it twice before in his life. Once at the side of a highway outside Sacramento when he arrived at an accident scene before the ambulance did and understood immediately that he was too late. Once in a courtroom in San Francisco when a verdict was read that should have gone the other way and the air in the room changed before anyone had processed the words. He was experiencing it now. Standing in a gravel parking lot in Sturgis, South Dakota, surrounded by the roar of 50,000 engines, looking at a tattoo on the forearm of an unconscious 14-year-old boy, and feeling the world rearrange itself around him into a shape he did not yet fully understand but recognized instinctively as permanent. Whatever came before this moment and whatever came after it were two different things entirely. He understood that without being able to explain it. The paramedic, a woman named Dara Sims from the Rapid City Regional Mobile Unit, had been working rally events for 6 years. She had seen things in Sturgis parking lots that most emergency responders encountered once in a career, if at all. She was not easily shaken. She stood with her hands hovering 3 inches above Eli's forearm for 4 complete seconds without moving. Her partner Gus Tremblay came around the side of the gurney, looked down at the boy's arm, and took 1 slow step backward. Not a startled step, a deliberate one, the kind of step a person takes when their body makes a decision that their mind is still catching up to. Neither of them spoke. Crow Vega, who had been standing 6 feet back with his arms crossed and his eyes on the FBI agents, shifted his gaze to Eli's arm. Something happened to his face that Razor had never seen happen to it before in 15 years of riding together. The color left it, not quickly, slowly, like water draining from something that had been holding it without knowing. Crow took 2 steps backward. Des Burrell caught him by the arm without being asked. Razor did not step backward. Razor stepped forward. He crouched down beside the gurney with his forearms on his knees and looked at the tattoo with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who needs to be absolutely certain before he allows himself to react. He was certain within 3 seconds. A broken compass rose. 7-pointed star overlaid at the center. And embedded in the geometry of it, only visible when you knew to look and knew the angle, a single letter pressed into the design like a signature. For Lena. Razor had been sitting at a kitchen table in Sonoma when Ren Calloway rolled up his sleeve and showed him that tattoo for the first and only time. A bottle of Jack Daniels between them. A Tuesday night in October 7 years and 3 months ago. Ren had explained the design quietly and without drama, the way Ren explained everything, laying it out piece by piece until the full picture assembled itself. He had said, "If anything ever happens to me and someone shows you this, trust them completely. No questions, no delays, just trust." Razor had laughed. He had said nothing is going to happen to you. 3 weeks later he was carrying Ren Calloway's casket through the parking lot of a church in Bakersfield, California, in the October heat, and the weight of it had felt like the most final thing he had ever held in his hands. He was not laughing now. Special Agent Dominic Ferris was on his phone. Razor noticed this the way he noticed everything, peripherally, without appearing to look. Ferris had moved 12 feet from the gurney and turned his back to the crowd, which was the move of a man who wanted privacy, not the move of a lead agent managing an active scene. His voice was low and flat, and whatever he was saying was not making it into the ambient noise of the lot. But his posture said enough. His posture said this situation has changed and I need someone to know that immediately. Razor filed that away. Ferris ended the call and turned back to the scene, and for 1 fraction of a second, before he recomposed himself into the expressionless mask of federal professionalism, something crossed his face when he found Razor already looking at him. Not surprise. Calculation. the expression of a man measuring a problem and deciding in real time how to handle it. Ferris was not alarmed by the tattoo. He was alarmed by Razor having seen the tattoo. Those were two entirely different alarms, and the distinction between them told Razor something critical. Ferris already knew what the tattoo meant, which meant Ferris already knew who Eli Calloway was, which meant the 4-minute arrival time was not a coincidence and had never been a coincidence, and every second that Razor stood in this parking lot without understanding the full shape of what he was standing inside was a second that someone else was using to get ahead of him. He stood up. He looked at Crow. Crow looked back at him with eyes that were asking a question that neither of them could answer yet in a parking lot full of federal agents. Razor said one word: hospital. They rode escort to Rapid City Regional in a formation that nobody in that ambulance was going to argue with. Crow on the left, Dez on the right, 2 more chapter members picked up from the rally perimeter falling in behind. The ambulance driver, to his credit, did not slow down or speed up in a way that suggested he was uncomfortable with the arrangement. He simply drove. Ferris did not follow. Razor noted that too. The waiting room on the 3rd floor of Rapid City Regional smelled like antiseptic and recycled air and the particular exhaustion of a building that never fully sleeps. Razor sat in a plastic chair with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the floor and let himself think. He thought about Ren Calloway. Not the version of Ren that lived in the eulogy he had delivered in Bakersfield, the road captain, the security architect, the brother who never missed a detail. He thought about the other version, the private one, the Ren who had shown up at Razor's kitchen table 6 weeks after Lena died, looking like a man who had walked through something that had burned away everything unnecessary and left only the essential parts. Ren had been quiet that night in a way that was different from his usual quiet. His usual quiet was the quiet of a man who was thinking. That night it was the quiet of a man who had decided. He had told Razor about the dossier. Not the details, not the names, just the fact of it. That he was building something. That he had found a thread and was following it, and that where it led was somewhere that certain people were going to work very hard to make sure he never arrived. Razor had told him to be careful. Ren had smiled and said careful is already built in. 3 weeks later, the accident on Interstate 5 outside Coalinga took him off the board, and the dossier was never found, and after 6 months Razor had accepted the thing he had never fully believed, which was that Ren Calloway was gone. He had been wrong. The tattoo on Eli's arm told him he had been wrong. Crow came back from the nurse's station and sat down in the chair beside him. He had the paperback. He had gone back to the dumpster before they left the Full Throttle lot, working on instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive in situations where instinct was the only currency that spent. He set the book on Razor's knee without explanation. Razor looked at it. Of Mice and Men. Cover missing. Spine cracked. Pages soft from handling. He opened it. He turned through the first 30 pages slowly, not reading, feeling. Looking for the thing that was not supposed to look like it was there. He found it between pages 84 and 85. A single index card, folded once, deliberately placed, not accidentally dropped. The fold crisp and intentional like everything Ren Calloway had ever done. Razor unfolded it. For names on one side written in a hand he recognized without needing to verify. Precise. Economical. Pressing slightly harder than necessary into the card the way Ren always pressed when he was writing something that mattered. 3 of the names he knew personally. He read them and felt the particular cold that has nothing to do with temperature, working its way from the base of his spine upward. He read the 4th name, his own. Below the names, in smaller writing, added after the others, the ink slightly different in shade suggesting a different pen and a different moment. They are not finished. Lily is the message. You are the target. Razor stared at the index card for a long time. The waiting room hummed around him. Somewhere down the corridor a monitor beeped in steady rhythm. The recycled air moved through the vents without caring about any of it. He turned the card over. On the back, in the same small writing, was something that had not been in the original outline. Something Ren had added, perhaps at the last moment, perhaps because he understood that Razor would need more than initials to believe what he was being asked to believe. A single line. 8 words. And when Razor read those 8 words, the index card in his hands began to shake. Not because of what they confirmed, because of what they meant someone inside the Brotherhood had already done. There are roads in America that exist specifically for thinking. Not the highways with their rest stops and speed limits and the constant presence of other people moving through the same space in the same direction. The other roads. The ones that cut through the middle of nothing in particular, where the land flattens out and the sky becomes the dominant feature and the only sound for miles is the engine beneath you and the wind against your face. Razor rode those roads from Sturgis to Phoenix. 1,400 miles of deliberate solitude with Crow on his left and Dez on his right, and the index card folded in the inside pocket of his cut, pressed against his chest, 8 words on the back of it that he had read 40 times since the waiting room at Rapid City Regional and that he still had not fully allowed himself to process. He would process them in Phoenix. He would process them when he had something to put them next to. Until then he rode and he let the land move under him and he thought about Ren Calloway the way you think about someone when you are no longer certain that the version of them you have been grieving was ever real. They crossed into Arizona on a Thursday morning with the sun already high and the desert floor shimmering in a way that made the horizon look like a rumor. Phoenix sat at the end of the heat like a city that had made its peace with discomfort a long time ago and stopped apologizing for it. Razor had contacts in Phoenix the way he had contacts in most southwestern cities. Not official contacts. Not the kind that existed in any database or on any business card. The kind built over 20 years of being a man that other men came to when official channels had failed them or when they needed something handled by someone who understood that the world operated on 2 levels simultaneously and that the visible level was rarely where anything important actually happened. He used one of those contacts to get a name inside the Maricopa County Department of Child Safety. The name he got was Priya Mendez. The regional office sat on a street in central Phoenix that had been slowly losing its commercial tenants for the better part of a decade. Empty storefronts on either side of a building that still had all its lights on because the work it housed did not have the option of closing down. Razor left the bikes 2 blocks east and walked in wearing nothing that identified him. Plain jacket. No cut. Priya Mendez met him in a conference room on the 2nd floor rather than at her desk, and she closed the door before she said anything. She was in her mid-40s with the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have spent years managing too many cases with too few resources. She looked at Razor the way experienced social workers look at everyone who sits across from them in a conference room, measuring, weighing, deciding how much of the truth this specific person can be trusted with. She pulled a physical folder from the stack she had carried in and set it on the table between them. She did not open her computer. Razor noted that. "I have been waiting," she said, "for someone to come and ask about this boy. Not hoping, not expecting, waiting." With the patience of someone who had already decided what they were going to say when the moment arrived and had simply been holding it until it did. Razor said, "Tell me." The file on Eli Calloway was wrong in 3 specific ways that Priya had identified within the first month of his placement at the Desert Sun Group home, and that she had been sitting on alone ever since because the people she would have normally escalated to were connected to the same network that had generated the wrongness in the first place. She laid them out one at a time, the way someone lays out evidence when they have been rehearsing the presentation in their head for a long time. The first problem was the birth certificate. The document referenced in Eli's intake paperwork linked to a social security number that returned a federal access restriction when run through standard verification channels. Not an error. Not a processing delay. A restriction. The specific kind that required a clearance level that a county social worker in Phoenix had no pathway to obtain. The second problem was the placement referral itself. Eli had not entered the Desert Sun Group home through Arizona's standard placement process. He had arrived via a referral from a nonprofit organization called Vanguard Youth Services, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Priya had looked up Vanguard Youth Services. Its registered agent was a law firm. The founding partner of that law firm had retired from the FBI's Atlanta field office in 2018. The third problem was the visitor. For 11 months, Every Tuesday and Thursday without exception. A man had signed into the Desert Sun Group home visitor log under the name R. Cole. The visits were logged as private tutoring sessions. They were not court-mandated, not program-funded, not connected to any official service plan in Eli's file. They were paid for privately, in cash, at a rate that Priya had calculated was significantly above market for anything resembling standard tutoring. R. Cole had never missed a single visit. Not one. Razor kept his hands flat on the table and his voice level. What did he look like, he said. Priya reached into the folder and produced a single photocopy from the facility's security camera system. Grainy. Time-stamped. A man at the front desk signing the visitor log with his face angled slightly away from the lens. Like he knew precisely where the camera was positioned. But the build was there. The set of the shoulders. The particular way the man held himself at the front desk of an institutional building. Not uncomfortable, not performing comfort, simply present in the way of someone who had walked into difficult rooms for a long time and stopped being intimidated by their furniture. Razor looked at the photocopy for a long time. Did he ride? Razor said. Priya looked at him for a moment. Front desk staff mentioned they could always hear him arriving, she said. The engine. From inside the building. Every visit. Razor took the photocopy from the table and folded it once and put it in the same inside pocket where the index card lived. He sat with what he now knew for the length of 3 breaths. Then he thanked Priya Mendez, told her she had done the right thing holding on to it, and told her to stay away from anything connected to this file from this point forward. He said it the way he said things that were not suggestions. She nodded like she had already intended to. The motel on Van Buren Street was the kind of place that asked no questions and provided no amenities beyond a bed and a lock on the door, which was all Razor needed. He spread everything on the small table under the window. The index card, the photocopy, the notes he had kept in his own shorthand during the conversation with Priya. He looked at the 4 names on the index card. Grant Holloway, the Tucson chapter president who had materialized at Razor's left shoulder at the precise moment Lily ran into the open lot. The handshake that had pulled Razor's attention for one critical second. That did not happen by accident. Holloway had positioned himself. He had known the window and he had filled it. The second name was a law enforcement contact embedded in the club's legal defense network for the better part of a decade. A man who had been trusted with information that moved in both directions. Razor would say that name out loud once in the right room at the right moment. Not before. The third name sat at the bottom of the first column and Razor had been looking at it and looking away from it in a rotating pattern since the waiting room at Rapid City Regional because his mind kept refusing to hold it still. The third name was someone from his own Sonoma chapter. Someone who had known the Sturgis itinerary. Known that Lily would be there. Known the geography of the full-throttle lot and the specific window of exposure that appeared when Razor stopped moving to acknowledge a fellow chapter president. Someone who had been best man at Razor's wedding 16 years ago. He put the index card face down on the table. He did not turn it back over. He was still sitting at that table at 11:47 in the evening when the burner phone rang. The burner number was known to fewer than 6 people alive. Razor had not shared it since Sturgis. He had not contacted anyone on it since arriving in Phoenix. Unknown number. He answered and said nothing. Silence on the other end. Not empty silence. Occupied silence. The kind that belongs to someone composing themselves before they speak. Then a voice. Older than he remembered. Worn at the edges. The specific roughness that accumulates in a voice that has spent years speaking to almost no one. But unmistakable. Absolutely unmistakable. Razor, the voice said. And Razor's hand tightened around the phone because he had buried this voice in Bakersfield 7 years ago and stood over the grave and said the words and driven away and spent 3,000 nights accepting that he would never hear it again. Ren, he said. A pause that lasted exactly long enough. They know you went to Phoenix, Ren said. Get back to Rapid City tonight. Eli is going to wake up and when he does the people on that card cannot be in a position to reach him first. Razor was already on his feet. Then Ren said the thing that stopped him mid-movement, that froze him standing in a Phoenix motel room at midnight with one hand on his jacket. The sniper was not there for Lily, Ren said. His voice was completely steady when he said it. The steadiness of a man delivering information he has been carrying for a long time and has made his peace with. Lily was never the target, Ren said. You were. She was just the mechanism to break your position and pull you into the open. The line went dead before Razor could speak. He stood in the silence of the motel room and understood, for the first time since Sturgis, the complete shape of what had been built around him. Not a reaction to something. Not improvised. Planned. Constructed piece by piece over years by someone who understood exactly how Razor moved and thought and what he would do when the person he loved most in the world ran into danger. He grabbed his jacket. He looked at Crow, who was already standing. We ride back tonight, Razor said. Crow asked why with his eyes. Razor said 4 words. Someone is inside the club. And in 15 years of riding together, in rooms and situations that had tested every version of Crow Vega that existed, Razor had never once seen the man's face go the color it went in that Phoenix motel room at 11:48 on a Thursday night. But there was something else. Something Razor had not said out loud yet because he was still turning it over, still measuring its weight, still deciding whether what he thought it meant was actually what it meant. The 8 words on the back of the index card. The ones that had made his hands shake in the Rapid City waiting room. He had not told Crow about those words. He had not told anyone. Because if those 8 words meant what he believed they meant, then the betrayal inside the Sonoma chapter ran deeper than a name on a card. It ran all the way back to the night Ren Calloway supposedly died. And someone in that chapter had known it was coming. They rode through the night without stopping. Phoenix to Rapid City is not a short road under any circumstances. 1,400 miles of American darkness. The desert giving way to plateau, giving way to the slow geological argument of the Rockies before the land finally flattened out into the long grass and open sky of South Dakota. Under different circumstances, it was the kind of ride that Razor lived for. The kind where the distance between where you started and where you are going creates enough space for a man to find the edges of his own thinking. These were not those circumstances. He rode hard and he rode silent, and Crow and Dez held formation without being asked because they understood without needing it explained that whatever was moving toward them was moving on a clock that none of them controlled. The burner phone sat in Razor's inside pocket next to the index card and the photocopy from the Phoenix security camera, and he did not look at any of it. He had everything he needed from those 3 items. What he needed now was Eli Calloway to still be breathing when he got back to Rapid City Regional. Room 412 was quiet at 5:40 in the morning. Crow had called ahead to the 2 chapter members posted outside the door, and they were still there when Razor came off the elevator, both of them upright and alert in the particular way of men who understand that the thing they are guarding is not replaceable. Razor exchanged 4 words with each of them. Nothing more was needed. He pushed the door open slowly. Lily was asleep in the recliner in the corner, her tiny leather boots set neatly side by side on the floor beneath her, a hospital blanket pulled up to her chin. Someone had brought her food at some point. The wrapper from a granola bar sat on the windowsill next to a paper cup. Razor stood at the foot of her chair for a moment and looked at his daughter sleeping in a hospital room and felt something move through him that he did not have a name for. Not relief exactly. Something older than relief. Something that lived below the level of language in the part of a person that understands, without articulation, the specific weight of almost losing something irreplaceable. Then he turned to the bed. Eli Calloway was still unconscious. Smaller than he had seemed in the parking lot, which was the way with kids once the adrenaline of a situation drained away and you could see them plainly. The bandaging on his left shoulder was clean. The split on his chin had been closed with 3 stitches. His breathing was slow, and even in his face in sleep had none of the watchfulness that Razor had noticed in the parking lot, that particular hypervigilance that belongs to kids who have learned that relaxing completely is a luxury they cannot afford. He looked in sleep like what he was, a 14-year-old boy. Razor pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down and looked at the boy's face and thought about Ren Calloway sitting across from him at a kitchen table in Sonoma with a bottle of Jack Daniels between them, saying things that Razor had not understood the full weight of until this exact moment. He sat there until the South Dakota sky outside the window began its slow transition from black to gray to the pale gold of early morning. He was still sitting there at 6:14 when Eli opened his eyes. The boy did not startle. That was the first thing Razor noticed. Most people coming up from unconsciousness in an unfamiliar room with a stranger sitting beside them would have startled. Eli Calloway looked at the ceiling, then at the window, then at Razor, and his expression moved through recognition and assessment and a kind of quiet resignation before settling into something that was almost calm. Like he had already worked out most of the possible versions of how this moment would go. "Where is the book?" he said. His voice was rough from the breathing tube they had removed 2 hours earlier. Razor reached under the chair and set the paperback on the bed beside Eli's right hand. Eli looked at it. Then he looked at Razor. "He got the message to you," Eli said. It was not a question. Razor said yes. Eli closed his eyes, and the exhale that moved through him was the exhale of someone releasing something they have been holding for a very long time. Not relief exactly. More like the specific release of a completed task. Of a thing carried a long distance finally set down. "He prepared me for almost everything," Eli said quietly. Razor waited. "Almost," Eli said again, and his right hand moved to the bandaging on his left shoulder. "Almost everything." By 9 in the morning word had moved through the Sturgis Rally Network the way word moves through that world. Not through any official channel or digital platform, but person to person, rider to rider, the ancient and reliable infrastructure of men who have spent decades learning to communicate in ways that leave no record. By 11 the east lot of the Full Throttle Saloon held 610 Hell's Angels members. It was not a church meeting. It carried no formal designation in the language of the club. There were no minutes being taken and no agenda had been circulated and no vote had been called to convene it. It had assembled the way storms assemble, through the convergence of pressure systems that had been building independently until the conditions for something inevitable were finally met. 610 men. Chapters from Sonoma and Tucson and Oakland and San Diego and Las Vegas and Denver and Dallas and Phoenix. Road captains and sergeants at arms and prospects who had been in the club long enough to understand that what they were being summoned to was not a conversation but a reckoning. Every engine was off. In the Black Hills of South Dakota in August, with the rally running at full capacity beyond the lot's perimeter, the sound of 50,000 engines continuing their roar made the silence inside the east lot feel like a physical thing, like something you could put your hands on. Razor stood at the center of it. He spoke for 9 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He did not use notes. He laid it out the way Ren Calloway had always laid things out, piece by piece, in the precise order that allowed each piece to prepare the ground for the next one. The tattoo. The index card. The 4 names. Phoenix and Priya Mendez and the visitor logs and 11 months of a dead man preparing a 14-year-old boy for a mission that only made sense if you understood what the boy was carrying and who he was carrying it to. When he got to the 3rd name on the card, he said it once. Clearly, at a volume that carried to the edges of the lot. And the silence that followed that name was a different quality of silence than the one that had preceded it. Denser. The silence of 610 people absorbing something simultaneously that none of them had been prepared to absorb. Some looked at the ground. Some did not move at all. One chapter president, a man with 23 years in the club and a face that had sat across from federal prosecutors without flinching, sat down on his bike and put both hands over his face and stayed that way. The 3rd name had been trusted by all of them. Had eaten at their tables and stood at their sides and known things about their operations and their families and their movements that only the deepest levels of brotherhood made available. Had used all of it. Grant Holloway stood at the eastern edge of the gathering with his hands at his sides and his chin level and the expression of a man who has arrived at the moment he has known was coming and has decided to meet it standing up. Whatever Holloway was, whatever he had done and whatever had been done to him to bring him to the place where he did it, he did not run. He did not speak. He simply stood and let the weight of 610 men knowing his name land on him fully. It landed hard. It started with Bishop Otis Kane, road captain of the Dallas chapter, ordained Baptist minister before he ever threw a leg over a Harley. A man who moved through the world with the specific gravity of someone who had made his accounting with it a long time ago and found the terms acceptable. He removed his riding gloves. He folded them once and placed them on his fuel tank. And he put one knee on the South Dakota asphalt without announcement, without ceremony, without asking anyone else to follow. He bowed his head. Crow went down next, then Des, then riders from Oakland and San Diego and Las Vegas in a wave that moved through the lot from the center outward like something spreading through water. Chapter presidents and road captains and men who had never bent a knee to anything in their adult lives going down one after another in the August heat. Grant Holloway went down on both knees. He was crying before his second knee touched the ground. 610 men on the asphalt of a South Dakota parking lot with the rally roaring beyond their perimeter, completely indifferent to the silence inside it. Some prayed in words. Some prayed without them. Some simply held the position with their heads down and their hands open and let whatever needed to move through them move. They were praying for a 14-year-old boy who had taken a bullet in a gravel lot with 43 cents in his pocket. They were praying for Ren Calloway, who had spent 7 years in the dark building something that had cost him everything and was not finished costing yet. They were praying, though most of them could not have articulated it in the moment, for themselves. For the thing that lives in men who choose brotherhood and means it, that gets tested in moments like this one and either holds or it does not. It held. The prayer had been going for 4 minutes when the motorcycle came in from the northern access road. A 1987 Harley-Davidson Sportster. Matte black. No markings. Moving at the deliberate pace of someone who is not trying to make an entrance but understands that one is unavoidable. It stopped at the eastern edge of the lot. The rider removed his helmet. And 610 men who had been in motion, spiritual or physical, went absolutely still. Because the face beneath the helmet was a face that the majority of them had last seen in a photograph at a funeral in Bakersfield, California, 7 years ago. Older now. Weathered in the specific way of a man who has spent years outdoors and alone and moving. Gray at the temples that had not been there before. Lines around the eyes that spoke of the particular exhaustion of a life lived in constant vigilance. But the eyes themselves were the same, precise, calm, carrying the weight of everything they had seen without being broken by any of it. Ren Calloway looked at 610 men looking back at him. He reached into his jacket. He produced a sealed manila envelope. He looked across 200 feet of silent asphalt directly at Razor, and when he spoke his voice carried in the silence the way voices carry when everything else has stopped to listen. It was never about the club, Ren said. It was about what the club knew and did not know it knew. He held up the envelope. This is the dossier. It names the driver who killed my daughter. It names who protected him. It names why that person needed me gone and why they will need every single one of you gone if this reaches the wrong hands. He paused. The driver who killed Lena was not a civilian. 610 men absorbed that sentence in the silence of the South Dakota afternoon. And then Ren Calloway said the 4 words that changed the shape of everything. He is not finished. The manila envelope in his hand, Razor could see from 50 feet away, was thicker than a dossier about one hit and run on a California highway had any reason to be. Whatever was inside, it was not just about Lena. Whatever was inside, it was about all of them. And someone, somewhere beyond the perimeter of that east lot, already knew that the envelope existed and had sent a sniper to Sturgis to make sure it never got opened. The question that Razor could not answer, standing in the center of 610 kneeling men with the August sun pressing down on all of them, was the question that was going to determine whether any of them walked away from what came next. The dossier named the driver. It named the protector. But Run had said on the phone from Phoenix that Ferris was not the top of the chain. He was the middle. which meant the envelope in Calloway's hand was either the end of the story or the beginning of a much larger and much more dangerous one. And Wren's face, as he walked toward the center of the lot through the parting crowd of kneeling men, did not carry the expression of a man who had arrived at an ending. Calloway walked through 610 kneeling men like a man walking through his own eulogy. Nobody reached for him. Nobody spoke. The crowd parted as he moved toward the center of the lot, and the only sound was the rally beyond the perimeter, that endless roar of engines that had been the backdrop to all of it, indifferent and continuous, the world outside this circle going about its business while everything inside it stood on the edge of something irreversible. He stopped in front of Razor. 7 years collapsed between them in the space of a breath. Not erased. Not resolved. Simply compressed into the specific silence that exists between two men who have carried the weight of the same loss from opposite sides of a lie neither of them constructed. Razor looked at him for a long moment. Then he said the only thing that was true enough to say first. "You should have told me." Wren held his gaze. "I know," he said. "I know. If you have stayed with this story from the beginning, if you rode through Sturgis and Phoenix and 1,400 miles of American darkness to get to this moment, then you already understand what this chapter cost every person in it. Hit that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. This is the kind of truth that deserves a full room." Wren did not hand the envelope to Razor. He carried it to Eli. Eli Calloway was sitting on a cooler at the southern edge of the gathering, hospital discharge bracelets still on his right wrist, bandaging visible above the collar of a clean shirt someone had brought him from the rally vendors an hour earlier. Lily Ruiz sat beside him with her shoulder touching his, close enough to be a statement, the way 9-year-olds make statements without knowing they are making them. Wren stopped in front of the boy and crouched down to eye level. The look that passed between them was not the look of strangers. It carried the specific texture of something that had been built over time, in a Phoenix group home on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, over 11 months of sessions that the visitor log had recorded as tutoring, and that had been something more fundamental than that. A father teaching a son everything he knew before he had to let him go. "You did exactly right," Wren said quietly. Eli looked at him. "It hurt," Eli said. Wren put his hand on the boy's right shoulder. "The good one." "I know," he said. "I am sorry for that." He held out the envelope. Eli took it with both hands and opened it with the deliberate care of someone who understands that what they are holding has a weight that goes beyond its physical dimensions. The dossier was 94 pages. Handwritten reconstructions. Photocopied documents obtained through 7 years of careful, patient, invisible work. Timeline analysis laid out with the precision of a man who had spent his career thinking in systems. GPS records. Photographs taken from distances that suggested a long lens and a longer patience. 3 sworn written statements from witnesses that Calloway had located in the years since his death. People who had seen things and said nothing because nobody had ever come to ask them the right questions in a way that made them feel safe enough to answer. The driver who killed Lena Calloway on Highway 99 outside Fresno was Special Agent Dominic Ferris. At the time of the accident, he had been a junior agent in the FBI's Sacramento field office, driving a personal vehicle after leaving a meeting that did not exist in any official record. A meeting with a man whose name appeared in 3 separate federal investigations over the following decade without ever resulting in a charge. Ferris had been drinking. The accident happened at 9:17 in the evening on a stretch of highway with no active traffic cameras. Lena Calloway was 7 years old, and she was walking back from a neighbor's house 200 yards from her front door. Ferris had stopped the car. He had gotten out. He had looked. And then he had gotten back in and driven away and used every tool that a federal badge makes available to a frightened man to ensure that what happened on that highway stayed on that highway. When Calloway began pulling the thread 7 years later, Ferris had escalated to the only solution that felt permanent. He had reached through a network of contacts and intermediaries to a man who could make a road captain on a California interstate disappear in a way that looked like the kind of accident that happens to men who ride fast. That man's intermediary was Grant Holloway. Holloway had not acted freely. The dossier made that plain in documentation that was difficult to read and impossible to dismiss. Ferris had been holding something over Holloway for 11 years. A single event from Holloway's past that had nothing to do with the club, something personal and catastrophic that Ferris had discovered through the surveillance infrastructure of his position and had been using as a leash ever since. Holloway had made wrong choices. He had made them repeatedly and with full knowledge that they were wrong, and the dossier did not minimize that. But it showed the mechanism. It showed the pressure that had been applied and the specific points at which Holloway had been given the choice between his secret and his integrity, and had chosen his secret every time until the weight of that choice had become the defining fact of his life. 610 men read those pages in relay over the following 2 hours, passing sections hand to hand through the lot in the August heat. And the sound that the reading produced was not anger exactly, though anger was present. It was something more complicated. The sound of a community processing a betrayal that had roots deep enough to implicate not just the people named in the document but the conditions that had made the betrayal possible. The dossier went to 3 private attorneys retained by the club's legal defense network before the sun went down. Copies were transmitted simultaneously to investigative journalists at the Dallas Morning News and the Sacramento Bee, 2 reporters who had been working federal corruption cases independently for years and who received the documentation through channels that could not be traced back to the east lot of the Full Throttle Saloon. Within 48 hours, Special Agent Dominic Ferris was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Within 6 weeks, a grand jury in Sacramento was convened. Ferris made 2 phone calls and sent 1 encrypted message in the window between his suspension and the revocation of his communications access. 3 of the people connected to those communications became witnesses for the prosecution within 30 days, because federal protection is only as durable as the authority behind it, and the moment that authority began to erode, the loyalty it had purchased evaporated with it. Grant Holloway walked into the Meade County Sheriff's Office on a Friday morning and provided a complete statement. He sat in that chair for 4 hours and he left nothing out. His attorney was present. His cooperation was total. What the club decided about Grant Holloway was decided in a room that no record was kept of, by the people whose decision it was to make, and the outcome of that decision was never disclosed to anyone outside that room. Some things belong to the Brotherhood. Razor sat beside Eli in room 412 of Rapid City Regional on the last night before the boy was cleared for discharge. The room was quiet. Lily had been taken back to the motel 2 hours earlier by Des, finally persuaded to sleep in an actual bed after spending 3 days in a hospital recliner with the focused loyalty of someone who had decided that leaving was not an option and required significant convincing to revise that position. Razor sat with his forearms on his knees and looked at the middle distance for a while before he spoke. "Your father trusted me with something," he said. "A long time ago. He asked me to trust back and I did, and then I thought I had lost the chance to honor either one of those things." He looked at Eli. "I am not going to lose it again," he said. "There is a room in Sonoma. It has been a storage room for 6 years, and it should not be a storage room. I am going to clear it out when we get back." Eli was quiet for a moment. "He said you would say something like that," Eli said. Razor looked at the window. "What else did he say?" Razor said. Eli almost smiled. The first time since Sturgis. Small and careful, the smile of someone relearning that the gesture is available to them. "He said you would offer the room and pretend it was not a significant thing," Eli said. "He said that was how you did everything important, like it was nothing, so that the other person did not feel the weight of receiving it." Razor did not say anything for a while. He always, Razor said finally, read people better than anyone. Ren Calloway did not go to Sonoma. He had been invisible for 7 years, and he understood the geometry of his own situation with the same precision he understood everything. The dossier had removed Ferris. The grand jury would handle what came next. But Run had said on the phone from Phoenix that Ferris was the middle of the chain, and nothing that had happened in the east lot of the Full Throttle Saloon had changed that arithmetic. The person above Ferris was still protected, still unnamed, still operating behind the infrastructure that had kept them invisible through 7 years of everything Ren had built and deployed and sacrificed to bring this moment to the place it had finally reached. The dossier was not complete. Run had known that when he handed it to Eli. He had built it to be enough to move against Ferris and enough to protect the club from what was coming, and it was both of those things. But it was not the full truth, and Ren Calloway had spent 7 years in the dark specifically because he was not a man who stopped before the full truth was in his hands. On the morning that Eli started his first semester at a school in Sonoma, California, Ren was on his 1987 Sportster somewhere in the high desert of eastern Nevada, riding toward a town that did not have a lot to recommend it except that somewhere inside it was the one surviving witness who could close the door that the dossier had left open. His last message to Razor came from a burner phone with a Nevada area code. 3 words. One more name. Razor read it standing in the kitchen in Sonoma with a cup of coffee going cold on the counter and the sound of Eli moving around upstairs in a room that was no longer a storage room and Lily's voice carrying from the backyard where she was explaining something at length to the neighbor's dog. He read the message twice. He set the coffee cup down. He walked to the garage and stood in front of his bike for a moment in the particular silence of a man who has already made his decision and is simply taking one breath before he acts on it. Then he put on his cut. He started the engine, and Razor rode toward whatever Ren Calloway had not yet finished, because that was what you did when a man had trusted you at a kitchen table and you had made a promise and the promise was not yet complete. That was what Brotherhood meant when it meant something. That was what it had always meant.